The previous lecture we have finished the light reaction step of the process of photosynthesis. Now the next process in which we will going to synthesize the carbohydrate, that is the dark reaction. Again we will let's discuss a few things about the previous lecture. That in light reaction what we have done is we have prepared the assimilatory power, that is ATP and NADPH2, which we will going to utilize in the next process, that is in the dark reaction. Light reaction is actually dependent completely on light, while the dark reaction is independent of light. That means it may occur in light as well as may occur in dark, but light reaction always need sunlight to takes place. So now here the dark reaction we will going to discuss. This dark reaction is nothing, it is the process where actually the CO2 reduced, or you can say the CO2 assimilate into the carbohydrate, that is the main product of photosynthesis. Carbohydrate which is prepared by this process is actually prepared in the form of glucose or in the form of sucrose. Now what exactly happens in the dark reaction? The dark reaction process is very different in different type of plant. Like on different species we have categorized this dark reaction into various types, that is C3, C4 and C2 reactions. So we have also classified the plant according to the dark reaction type happening in them, that is C3 reaction जिस भी plant में हो रहा है, that plant is known as C3 plant. The C4 reaction जिस भी plant में हो रहा है, that plant is known as C4 plant, and the C2 plant is another type of reaction. Now here we will going to discuss the common methodology which is occurring in all these plants, where whether it is following C3 process or it is following C4 process or it is following C2 process. So here the dark reaction is mainly including this C3 and C4 reaction, because C2 reaction is a type of photorespiration. That means the product if formed during dark reaction which is toxic to the plant is removed or converted into non-toxic form by this C2 reaction. Fine. So C2 reaction actually is, you can say, is the way to remove the toxic material produced by C3 and C4 reaction in the plants. Now dark reaction, exactly what is happening in the dark reaction? Here 3 steps involves. Basically it occurs at stroma of chloroplast. That means you can say the site where the C3, where the dark reaction is occurring, it is occurring at the stroma region of chloroplast, while the light reaction was occurring on the grana or thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast. Then the raw material required for dark reaction is CO2, which we obtain from atmosphere through stomatal opening. ATP, NADP, H2. These are the ATP is the source of energy, NADPH2 is like a reducing agent, that is the full form of NADPH2 is nicotine adenine diaminophosphate hydrogen. That means this particular reducing agent and ATP, it already formed during the light reaction in presence of light, and these power now will be utilized in this dark reaction process. Now this dark reaction having 3 main steps. First, carboxylation. Second, reduction. And the third is regeneration. Okay. Now what do you mean by this carboxylation? Carboxylation means where CO2 utilized, and this CO2 utilization process, that means you can see the CO2 utilized by or combined by any other CO2 acceptor present in the stroma region itself of chloroplast is known as carboxylation. So what is happening here? CO2 utilized, or you can say accepted by CO2 acceptor like RUBP in C3 plant and PEP in C4 plant. That means there are different CO2 acceptor in different type of plant. In C3 plant, the CO2 acceptor, the first CO2 acceptor in C3 plant present in the stroma region is known as RUBP. The full form is ribulose bisphosphate. Ribulose bisphosphate. This is the first CO2 acceptor in case of C3 plant. But in C4 plant, there is another CO2 acceptor, that is PEP. The full form is phosphoenol pyruvate. Now, one more thing is this, that why we call it as C3 plant and why we call it as C4 plant, because in C3 plant, after accepting the CO2, whenever the first product will be going to form in this process contains 3 carbon. That means the first product formed in C3 plant is 3 carbon compound. That is why it is known as C3 plant. While in C4 plant, the first product, whatever the first product formed after carboxylation process contains 4 carbon. So first product formed is 4 carbon compound. That is why the plant is known as, the reaction occurring in this plant is known as C4 reaction and the plant is known as C4 plants. Now here, if the 3 carbon compound forms in C3 plant, so definitely the RUPP must be of 2 carbon compound. In the same way, if in C4 plant the product formed is 4 carbon compound, so the PEP must be having 3 carbon compound, because by accepting one molecule of CO2 having 1 carbon compound, they will going to form 3 carbon compound in C3 plant and 4 carbon compound in C4 plant. Now, this particular process, that is carboxylation, in which the CO2 accept by RUPP and CO2 accept by PEP in C4, obviously the reaction must have been catalyzed by certain type of enzyme. So here the enzyme used to catalyze this reaction is Rubisco for C3 plants and Pepco for C4 plant. The full form of Rubisco is ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. CO means carboxylase oxygenase. This particular enzyme, Rubisco enzyme, is the most abundant enzyme in nature that found in plant. So Rubisco is सबसे ज़्यादा मिलने वाला amount में enzyme है, and it has 2 important role, that it can takes place or it can play role in carboxylation as well as it can also play role in the oxygenation process. Pepco का full form है phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase oxygenase. So that means it is also carboxylating as well as oxygenating role in itself. The full form of Rubisco is ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, and the full form is Pepco is phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase oxygenase. Now here, this is a cycle actually. So what is happening during this cycle is, first step we have discussed, that is carboxylation. This is 4 carbon compound 3 phosphoglycerate. Here CO2 is accepted by RUBP, catalyzed by the enzyme Rubisco. Now this 3 phosphoglycerate, that is the very first compound, which is the 4th carbon compound. Sorry, it's a 3 carbon compound because we are discussing C3 reaction. 3 carbon compound which is formed. Now it will undergo the reduction process, where this 3 phosphoglycerate compound reduced into triose phosphate. This triose phosphate compound formed after reduction from 3 phosphoglycerate, because in this reduction process actually the NADPH2 is being utilized. Fine. So here this NADPH2 is a reducing agent which actually reducing this 3 phosphoglycerate into triose phosphate, as well as the energy has been also utilized in this step, that is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, must have been utilized into and broke up into ADP and inorganic phosphate. Now this triose phosphate, which is actually 3 carbon compound, but this complete cycle actually run 2 times, because in particular one cycle the triose phosphate which is forming, now this triose phosphate is converting into the sugar or sucrose. Sugar means here I am talking about glucose. Now which will accumulate in the form of starch in the plants. So this is the reduction steps where the 3 phosphoglycerate convert into triose phosphate by the use of these assimilatory power. Now we again need to regenerate the 3rd step, that is regeneration. We need to regenerate the triose, we need to regenerate the RUBP, ribulose biphosphate. This regeneration occurs from this triose phosphate back, because this triose phosphate, which is 3 carbon compound, out of every 3 carbon compound, basically 1 carbon again utilized, or you can say the 2 carbon is being utilized, because it is 3 carbon compound and RUBP is 2 carbon compound. So out of 3 carbon compound, in each cycle 2 carbon again utilized to regenerate this particular compound RUBP. So remaining 1 carbon out of triose phosphate will going to utilize in the process of formation of glucose molecule. As such, glucose contains 6 carbon. So this particular cycle where the carboxylation, this is first step. Carboxylation means addition of CO2. Reduction is the second step. Reduction in general chemistry language means the addition of hydrogen. So here the hydrogen is being adding, and this hydrogen we are getting from this NADPH2, and this reaction also utilize some source of energy in the form of ATP. So this reduction steps now will going to form a product triose phosphate. But this triose phosphate, since it's a 3 carbon compound, but out of this 3 carbon, the 2 carbon again utilized to form RUBP. So that is the 3rd step, that is regeneration of RUBP. Because it is very important to regenerate this particular compound, because it is a very wholesale source of CO2 acceptor. That is why it is very important to regenerate this particular compound. Now in regeneration, out of this 3 carbons, since 2 carbon is being utilized, so a particular one cycle is contributing only 1 carbon in the formation of glucose. So how many times of this cycle should run to produce the 6 carbon compound glucose? So this Calvin cycle, this is known as C3 cycle, is also known as Calvin cycle. It's run 6 times to produce 1 molecule of glucose, because 1 molecule of glucose contains 6 carbon compound. So this is overall the dark reaction process in which we are doing first step carboxylation, then we are doing reduction, then we are doing regeneration of RUBP. This particular cycle runs 6 times in order to obtain the glucose compound, that is C6H12O6, which is 6 carbon compound. Now this dark reaction, this particular dark reaction we known as Calvin cycle or C3 reaction, which is occurring in the C3 plant, because here the first product is forming is 3 carbon compound. In the same way, in some of the plant, the C4 dark reaction is taking place. The C4 means where the first carbon compound form is 4 carbon compound, as well as their certain steps of dark reaction is different. Now, what is the difference in between C3 plant and C4 plant? Now C4 रिएक्शन में जो फर्स्ट कंपाउंड फॉर्म होता है इज 4 कार्बन कंपाउंड, दैट इज oxaloacetic acid. This is the first carbon compound form, which is 4 carbon compound known as oxaloacetic acid. And here pepco is the first compound of accepting, which is accepting 1 molecule of CO2. So obviously pepco is the 3 carbon, PEP, phosphoenol pyruvate, is a 3 carbon compound which is accepting 1 molecule of CO2 and forming this 4 carbon compound known as oxaloacetic acid. And this reaction catalyzed by the enzyme pepco phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase oxygenase. Now what is the difference कि C4 reaction is occurring in different particular type of plant and C3 is occurring in different type of plant? Actually I must say the C4 plant is more efficient and C4 reaction is more efficient than the C3 plant. Why? Because the C4 plant is actually utilizing 2 type of tissues of the plant, that is the mesophyll cells and the bundle sheath cells. C4 plants is occurring in such plant where certain type of apparatus found which is different from the normal C3 plant, that is the Kranz anatomy. In C4 plant, it means in this particular plant there is another bundle sheath cells found present inside of the tissue, and these bundle sheath cells actually thus surrounded by the cell known as mesophyll cells. Mesophyll cells. Now what happens in C3 plant? The toxic material can be formed through the process of photosynthesis, but that toxic material does actually not formed in the C4 plant. So there is a benefit of C4 plant over the C3 plants. So that is why C4 plant is more advantageous over the C3 plant, because there is no toxic material form in case of C4 plant, as well as toxic material may form in case of C3 plant. Okay, that's all.